I'm really, really, really happy to be here. I do a lot of traveling, and this is only the second time since 2019 that I'm speaking in the US. Last time was a month ago. That the knowledge work in Europe has been really vibrant in terms of systems design, and the US is, in my experience, kind of catching up. And so I'm really grateful for this conference and this opportunity for us to begin to develop communities closer to home, where I can take a train instead of sleeping on a plane. So this is me, the person in the doorway. The first time I saw this, I wanted to tattoo it to me. And I've spent a lot of time in my career trying to figure out what that person in the doorway needs. And so it wasn't always like this for me. I was originally a back-end engineer, full stack, as they say. I don't even know what that would mean anymore. And I was building enterprise software, which meant we wrote a lot of custom code and stuck it all into one instance. And mostly we built CRUD applications, so we built big websites. At some point I was working on the biggest digital properties on the internet, which is kind of funny now when I think of how big the platform systems are now. And then at scale, and what we meant by at scale was add a lot of varnish. And then somehow put a lot of rules in varnish so that you were married to it for the rest of your life. Database replication on the back end, this is what we meant by scale. So we worked in a pretty solid container. And now my primary focus as a systems architect is on relational complexity. And this really happened naturally. The same people that I built monolithic software for 15 years ago now had 42 different destinations for the same information that they wanted to be presented on a web page. And so I had to and wanted to become interested in systems of software, which naturally made me focus on relationships, right? Because when you create a relationship between two software parts, 1 and 1 equals 3. You have one part, you have the other part, and then you have whatever happens in the relationship between these two parts, right? So it's a good day when there's unexpected behavior and it's caused by a bug in code. That's a joy day, right? Because generally it's in eventual consistency, whatever we mean by that in this particular system. And there's a talk later that's going to dive even deeper into that, so I'm very excited for the overlap. So I hear a lot of people equating systems architecture with Kubernetes skills. This is a very common debate happening online, and I wish that this was true. I wish that mostly what I did was become very expert in Kubernetes some days. But in order to change relational patterns in software systems, I also have to change the thinking and communication patterns in the organization, because Conway, right? I don't do this because Conway says. I do this because I've seen this in every software system I've looked at. You show me the code, and I can tell you how the people these people hate these people. That's why they tightly coupled a MySQL database together, so they never have to talk to each other. They can just fight about whose rights overwrote someone else's rights. So from a systems perspective, there is no difference between the social system and the technology system, because one generates the other, and then the other impacts the first. So that's how I introduce myself. And it's true. I have been a software engineer, and I've played engineering leadership roles, and I'm a systems architect, and I've worked for organizations that you've heard of. Now I'm designing a greenfield platform, and I got to build the whole team myself. It's awesome because we can invent our processes to suit our work. But this is literally only half of the story. So the other half I don't talk about in talks until now, which is I was 33 years old when I tumbled into this career. I went back to school. I thought I was going to study physics because I want to be like Jess. This is my entire purpose in life, is to be like Jess. And I had to take a C++ course. And then I fell in love with information technology and programming. There were so many things about it. Not that I hadn't done it, I'd done a little bit of it, but when I dived into it, the possibilities seemed endless. And I wanted to see how far the rabbit hole goes. So this was a seemingly big shift. When I went to university the first time, I was a theater major. And I also was an aspiring writer. I would like to say, in this moment, I am proving my family wrong, that money spent on theater education will never lead to anything. I use these skills all the time. I feel good about that, considering the money that was spent, that I never became an actor, well, a little bit. Story for another time. So when I was at school the first time, or university, as the Europeans say, I wrote on a typewriter because we didn't have a PC yet, certainly not college kids in Boston. I made phone calls from the payphone at the end of the dormitory hall because I'd never heard of a cell phone. They were publicly available, but they cost $14,000 in today's money. We were spending our spare change on pot and then Steve's ice cream. So you had to have enough for both. Steve's ice cream, still to this day, best ice cream I've ever had. I don't think it exists in Boston anymore, which is very sad. When I wanted to see a movie, I had to leave the house. I read magazines, I lived in libraries. I got 2 apartments as a young adult because they were proximal to the library. I mailed letters and I used maps. And when I got lost, I stopped and asked for directions. Okay, total lie. I never stopped and asked for directions. I hate asking for directions, but I would have had to do that if I wasn't stubborn, right? You get the point. So this year, a lot of speakers are going to and are talking about AI, right? Previously, we were talking about monolith to microservices, CRUD applications to event-driven. At the beginning of my career, we were talking about print to digital. At the beginning of my life, BASIC was invented. So the rate of technology change is exponential. Though we like to think of it as linear, this very familiar model isn't even how sapiens evolved, which I learned on QI, which is my favorite show. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it, getting some way to get British television. But we understand what this means. And given this exponential rate of change, we've experienced 20,000 years of change in my lifetime. Now, I don't love drawing attention to being an outlier in tech, to being a woman of a certain age in some conferences more than others. One of the reasons that I don't like doing this is the mother test. How many times have I heard this bullshit? Oh my gosh. In a keynote last year, the keynote speaker said, you have to help your mother with her little website. Half of the speakers in the room were digital technologists and architects and mothers. I don't know why we cling to this. This quotes, this is an Atlantic article that quotes Flipboard's co-founder, Mike McHugh. He said, think about the average person, the person who could benefit from technology, but who's not necessarily adept at technology. So if you'd seen my son and I on a Saturday afternoon hunched over our Telnet clients hunting trolls together in Marentha, which was a fully text-based online role-playing game, you might not be surprised to see me here today. Nowadays, my version of the mother test is my son is sure he writes better regular expressions than me. My son's a freak. He likes writing regular expressions. He has a Kubernetes server for his own pleasure. And so I feel like we grew up, but we never really did. We've kind of kept the same dynamic. So I love my career, right? And I don't want to be embarrassed for loving what I do or feel like I don't fit in. And I love my career because it requires constant learning. Right? That was the joy. That was the thing that made me take the blue pill, right? Constant learning. But surprise, learning isn't the hard part. Over time, the hard part is we don't learn. Over my longer life experience, I see peoples, teams, organizations, countries make the same mistake again and again and again, expecting different results. When I have architected a few big digital transformations, in the end, the whole situation looked more like this, including twice where all the C-levels who started the digital transformation were no longer with the organization, some by choice and some by not. So why? When we have all this revolutionary technology, what is the iceberg that we hit? Right? And I became fascinated by this out of self-preservation. What's the challenge? What's the iceberg? And bluntly, the iceberg is we don't think in systems. That we react to changing events and circumstances. We react to what's visible, to what's happening. But we don't go deeper. And in fairness, we have actually very few processes that would support us doing this. So we might have experienced 20,000 years of change on the surface, but lurking underneath are a lot of the exact same mental models, organizational structures, the ideas about what we think we know, and we're reinforcing them. So we're trying to change what's underneath the surface by changing what's above the surface. And that, in my experience, just doesn't work. I love this delightfully snarky, scaled agile DevOps maturity framework. The whole thing is satire, and it promises enterprise transformation without the risk of culture change. And I love this because someone named the iceberg. This is pretty much what my career has asked from me. Please change everything without changing anything that I don't want you to change. And, if I were a miracle worker, maybe. So the challenge is, the reason we can't do enterprise transformation without culture change is because the real system is the construction of systematic thought itself, rationality itself. We have the system in our minds and in the way we communicate, and that is directly interrelated to the system that we build. We made all of this up. We made up Agile, we made up architecture, domain-driven design, we made up Kubernetes, we made up Kafka, we made up value streams. So we've made all of this up, and we can evolve it. Right? We don't have to adopt it in a monolithic kind of way. And Pirsig goes on to say that if a factory is torn down, but the rationality which produced it is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. This is what happened the first time my team went from monoliths to microservices. We were a savvy bunch. We kind of got it. And then we did a bunch of work, and then we realized, wow, these microservices, they're pretty tightly coupled. Because our brains were pretty tightly coupled, right? We had been working in a layered stack for so long, asynchronicity was a challenge for us. So we did it again, and we got it, we figured it out. But changing the tech wasn't as hard as changing our own rationality, our own kind of core structures. That actually was harder. So it's not even just that the rationality is torn down, but we also see the pattern where we think we've torn down the rationality, but it resurfaces, or we don't work with it, okay? So for example, way back when, we had to solve the problem of increasing unknowns, right? A traditional kind of waterfallness was not going to help us to design something new. And so in my teams, we practiced Agile. And there are lots of things from that time period that I still use in my career. The ability to think well with others, some of these qualities that are essential to systems architecture was what we were experiencing. But now everyone hates Agile like it's causing climate change. Right? But do we no longer have increasing unknowns? Like, what about the problems we were trying to solve? What do we do about those problems? We're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We made it up so we can evolve it as we learn and discover this doesn't work for us as things change. So what next? Which is actual agility, right? That's actual agility. So imagine the next time you hear mother test, how many informational, social, and technological paradigms have shifted around me in my lifetime. Like how many times I've been that person in the doorway, and how much I've had to learn to be standing here. And then, if you're not already having the same experience, you will. This is coming for all of us, that we face complex systems challenges, and everything, including climate change, is a systems challenge. And we will have to transform our thinking over and over and over again. And so that is, I would argue, the new core skill. As we move from software to systems of software, we are also transforming our mechanistic, industrialized thinking. And not when we need it, but when it's holding us back. And I think this attachment to linear processes is the number one reason why transformative initiatives are digital asynchronous initiatives. And Kubernetes clusters, Kafka streams, ChatGPT prompts aren't going to solve this for us, right? So what will? So we're going to look at 4 levels of shifting. One is on an individual level. You are a system of thinking, and you'll have to be constantly engaging in systems design of your own internal processes. And then together, like right now in this room, we've created a system of thinking. And for the next 2 days, we will be influencing and impacting through this relationship the way that we think about things. And also, we can change our system of thinking, right? This is something not only that we can do, but we want to do. And we can invent systems of thinking. One of the challenges for me right now is that we don't really have the vocabulary that conveys systems thinking processes because we've used the vocabulary to mean something different. So I use the example Agile, but if you're in a meeting of 5 people and you just use that word, nobody is thinking the same thing because it has everything to do with experience, right? So I've introduced a concept that now is experienced so differently. People describe Agile to me in a straw man way. Like, yeah, that's awful. That experience you're having is awful. Is there agility in that? Because I don't really see that it's kind of like, and so part of what we're doing when we're inventing systems of thinking is inventing the vocabulary to talk to each other about this. So the first shift then is valuing knowledge work. And the second shift is thinking well together. And the third shift is discovering leverage points. And the fourth shift is changing the paradigm. So we're going to go through each one of these, and we're going to go through each one what this means, but like all things in systems, you'll definitely want to explore more deeply because what I can explain in about a half an hour won't be depth enough for you to begin to maybe to apply these better, but it gets us started. So shift 1, knowledge work. So systems architecture is knowledge work. It's the crafting and the synthesizing of knowledge. Building software is knowledge work, I would argue, because we're literally encoding our knowledge. That's what we're doing. But in my experience, we rarely approach these activities as knowledge work. And this is Frederick Winslow Taylor. He's arguably why. He's influenced how we work tremendously. So Taylor was an engineer who became a foreman. And he said he was constantly impressed by the failure of his team members to produce more than about 1/3 of what Taylor thought they should be producing. I'm sure none of you have had this experience professionally, this kind of pressure of someone else thinks you should be producing more. So he called this scientific management, and it's based on the observation that workers who are forced to perform repetitive tasks work at the slowest rate that goes unpunished. He said, and this mental model is still with us, he said, we're all trying to trick our employers into thinking we are doing work. He called it systematic soldiering. People will avoid work, soldiering, and the systematic means that they'll do the minimal amount of work allowable by the organization. So this was the problem most of our management structures are designed to solve. Taylor had an apprentice named Henry Gantt. Until the American Civil War, Gantt's family depended on slave labor. And then they lost their land as a result of the war. He moved to Baltimore, where he met Taylor and became a major proponent of scientific management. Is there anyone who's never seen a Gantt chart? Yeah, it's still very much part of our life. And they both believed that management is knowing exactly what you want men to do and then seeing they do it in the best and cheapest way. Fastest, too. They would love 10x developers because they would pay you by lines of code, not salary, lines of code. More lines of code, you make more money. And they also, scientific management needs control over people's bodies. When a manager tells you to walk, you walk. When he tells you to sit down, you sit down. And we see this playing out in the back to the office discussions that are happening. Even though people are producing research that says hybrid work is more productive, people who have been very trained in business thinking have been trained in Taylorism. And so there's a core belief that if we're not visible in the office, we're systematic soldiering. So if we use the iceberg model then to describe this scenario, the core mental models is that workers are inherently lazy. They will avoid work. And so we set up structures in the form of a hierarchy designed to control productivity. That is its primary purpose. And this leads to patterns of task-driven development. You maybe have experienced this, where an organization thinks that they'll get good software by assigning each individual person on the team specific tasks to do, and somebody else is sort of keeping track of the relationship in them. And then what you get is your goal is to meet normalized expectations. And the normalized part is the tricky part, because we're meeting expectations, but these are expectations that we've just sort of generally come to think of as expectations, right? That this is the way we do things, right? This is how you do it. This is the way. And we're taught from a very young age to expect this as adults. If we had more time, we could go deeper into history, which would be fun. But the education system was designed with similar goals. It was designed to feed this system. And so Peter Senge says that we'll never transform the prevailing system of management without transforming the prevailing system of education, because they are the same system. I think this is a bit overstated, But learning teams, in my experience, are generally very good systems thinking teams. They overlap a lot. So the way we define and structure learning has a lot to do with the way we structure our work in technology. So there's a big, important overlap. And for me personally, when does maturity happen? So before I went into technology, I was a parent of somebody who fits right, who is a microservices architect now. And in many organizations that I've worked with and worked as part of or worked with, the engineering leadership is like a nanny culture feel. And I'm really not interested in ensuring adult people do their work. Like, I feel like I kind of did that at home already. Instead, I'm interested in doing hard things together, right? How do we do the things that are difficult to do? We can't do them alone. How do we organize ourselves so that we can have impact on the world as a group and do knowledge work together? Larry Pirsig, who taught me so much about knowledge, who died last year, he says that those companies that don't adapt to understanding knowledge as a force of production will slowly die and will never know what killed them. I kind of hope that this is true, but I also see evidence that maybe it's not. There's so many things to say at the moment about this. But what I will say is that Larry also said that a big mistake that we make is emphasizing knowledge stock to the detriment of knowledge flow. A whiteboard test tests for knowledge stock. What do you know? A better test in the systems age is how can you learn? Tomorrow you're going to come and build something with completely different tools than the ones you're using today. How's that going to be for you, right? The skill of knowledge flow, of sharing knowledge, of using other people's knowledge to be able to come up with good solutions, this is so important in our work going forward that any way we encourage knowledge flow over knowledge stock, or not one or the other, we need both. But not to the detriment. So if we make a different iceberg model, transform our thinking from Taylorism to knowledge work, then the core mental model is that expertise, critical thinking, and interpersonal skills generate value, right? This is what we bring to the table. Increasing expertise, the ability to think critically and analytically, and the ability to work with other people in productive ways. And so then we have a hierarchy to support mastery and knowledge flow. So notice, I'm still using the word hierarchy. Systems outside of human systems do have hierarchy. They just don't have hierarchy the way human dominion mind has made a hierarchy. Hierarchy is more like servant leadership, where it coordinates for the subsystem. So similar to if I am a farmer of an apple orchard, the trees are what produces value. What I do is develop the ecosystem in which they thrive and make changes in the ecosystem to help them to thrive better. And then you end up with patterns of initiative-driven development, where people are organized and coordinated more to solve problems or create new things or re-examine a reoccurring problem we don't know how to fix. And we end up increasing our value every day we go to work. Because every day that we go to work, we get a little more expertise, a little more critical thinking, even when we fail. It's very trite to say, but I actually have learned more from failures and I hate it, and I hope I never learn another thing because it's so painful, and it takes me so long to recover when I'm in a situation where I don't know if I'm losing my mind because what is even happening here, which is what the sinking and you hit an iceberg feels like. But retrospectively, it taught me so much more. So I'm not encouraging failure, But I am encouraging making good use of failure because everybody else is having the same problem, right? So if we can be part of the solution, learn from our failure, we're going to generate more value even. So what would systems leadership look like, right? So systems leadership and management, they can overlap, but they're not the same thing, as we can see from the models. So you can contribute systems leadership without being a manager, and if you're a manager, you can also contribute systems leadership. And so the core is synthesizing knowledge and maximizing its impact. So in other words, I am trying to understand something about a system, and I go to people with relevant expertise and ask them questions and bring that information in. I learn, I talk to people who disagree with me, I understand product's view of something, and through this process, I come up with a recommendation. I don't just mush together what people are saying. I will give you my favorite example of this. I see it all the time. Synthesizing knowledge is figuring out how different priorities are conflicting and how they serve the system as a whole. Instead, what we see is car boat. This part of the organization, this group, they want a car. And this part of the organization, they want a boat. They both have budget, and they're arguing about car boat. So the organization says to the engineers, build a car boat. So the engineers build a car boat, and everybody hates it because nobody wanted a car boat, right? Because we don't have the space to synthesize why they need, there's truth, there's something about the car, something about the boat. So how can we evolve the system to meet these needs without building a car boat? And then when we're providing systems leadership, we're developing tools and processes that develop collective mastery. So one of the hardest things for me about being a systems architect in new situations, and I've been through this in maybe 5 really big long-term, multi-million situation, I kind of have to make up a whole bunch of the process. Like I can't just, let's TOGAF and have everybody follow that, because each situation is different. So I borrow from these really great approaches and frameworks that we have, but I can't never just adopt something just wholesale, because every circumstance will need slightly different tools and processes to suit the people and the way they think in that situation. And that's one of the things I love about my team now, is that we do this really well together. We have about 100 and some odd years of experience between us. And we still are running into things that don't really work, right? So we get to adapt them. And what the pattern then is knowledge flow. So we talk about this as transparency, right? We say, oh, transparency. But in systems, in non-human systems, the design of information flow is what makes a system healthy and survive. And because I work in digital information systems, this is what I design, information flow. And so the goal in patterns is for knowledge flow to be not a giant pile of information you have to sort out, but also not no information about what you're doing and why you're doing it. There's that. Information flow is sort of a dance of constraints to discover what the right information flow in a particular circumstance is that helps people design systems and solve hard problems, right? So we get these things going, it increases our ability to do hard things together. And like I say, we can be doing this in any role that we're playing. So in the systems age, knowledge work means working together because we can't do it alone. There's too much complexity. You know, we had the sort of, so many times. Earlier in my career, we'd have the hero engineer who had incredible expertise in the piece of software that we were building, and that person would come and be incredibly productive. And that's, I mean, people have different levels of speed when they're doing things, and knowledge is good. But now that's a hindrance in every situation I work in, because that person has only one perspective, one part of the system in their head. The parts of the system actually have to interrelate. And so we need each other. And so an improv team forms a successful generative system. Is there anyone not familiar with what improvisational comedy is? Have you seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? Right? So improv actors go out to do a scene and they don't know what the scene's going to be about. The audience tells them. And also, they don't know what the other people are going to say because there's no script. This is truly terrifying. Once again, though, having done and taught improv turned out to be a valuable technology skill, because basically improv is what I'm doing all the time, right? So the core rule for an improvisational team is yes and. So we warm up with Simon Says, right? Pat your head, and everyone says yes. You know, wave your arms like a chicken, and everyone says yes. We do this to condition our minds to say yes to whatever it is that comes at us. Now, this does not mean I agree with it, I submit myself to it. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that I am open to what happens and then will contribute on from there. If someone refuses to engage, who says no, I don't think so. Change my mind. The scene dies a horrible and painful death. You only have to experience this once to never want to experience it again, right? So instead, we're not listening for what's wrong, right? We're listening for what we can use and how we can contribute to strengthen what's already been there. So imagine if next week, every meeting you attended was like an improv team, where people say an idea and the other people say, what I understand you to be saying is the API is too slow and you'd like us to talk about increasing the speed. Yes, and this is my reasons for it. Great, okay. Here's why I think that maybe it's actually fast enough. Here are some suggestions about user experiences with, like, people are having a conversation together. And instead, my experience in tech is that we are a big no culture. We are a big opinion-giving culture. So rather than generating ideas like an improv team, we focus on pointing out what's wrong, reinforcing our own ideas. We don't do it that way. We do it this way. This opinion giving is insufficient. I love opinion giving. I love conferences because we can have, like, beer. I don't drink beer, but you know what I mean, at the end, and we can talk about our opinions and debate them, and I love that. But it's insufficient as knowledge workers, right? Because we're looking for the best possible solution under the circumstances, and there is no right answer. And the circumstances change and will continue to change. So what we need to do is show me how you arrived at this conclusion. What convinced you? What convinced you that this opinion you're sharing is correct, gives you confidence in working on this? So I can take the journey with you and add to these reasons, right? To help me understand your point of view, to see it from your point of view. So in this way, we're creating cohesion rather than division, even when we disagree. I can acknowledge that someone has a completely wrong view of the world. I might not call it wrong, but I still think it's wrong. I'm not convinced that other people are correct, but I have acknowledged their point of view, which helps me to construct one rather than fight against it. So we are going to, good. All right. We're going to talk about the beer game. And we're going to talk about the beer game because the reason that we don't have an improv culture is very, very scientifically demonstrated. Has anyone actually played the beer game? No. Okay. So it was invented by Jay Forrester, who a pioneer systems analyst. A lot of what we know, we learned from him. So the beer game is this, and we have two, so I'll do it in three. Okay. So we get together in a room. We have a little game board in front of us. Y'all, this front group right here, because cool hair. You have created a craft beer, and it's awesome. It's really good. And so you like worry about the hops or whatever it is that is involved in this craft beer. You, all of you in the back, you're the distributors. So sorry, that's not really very cool and sexy, but you make the most money, so that's good. And y'all, you have a little liquor store in Austin, Texas, where you only sell kombucha and craft beer. It's in a renovated gas station. This actually exists in Austin, Texas. So, Taylor Swift at the Super Bowl holds up your beer. Now everybody wants it, right? Everybody wants it. So y'all are freaking out because you have all kinds of people on fixie bikes coming to your place to get this beer. There is a very straightforward information sharing process. Imagine a digital form. You use a digital form to tell them what you want to order every week. Y'all have multiple digital forms to all of your breweries. You send that information to place orders. And then you have a fax machine, because you're cool, that gets a printed copy of this, right? Okay, go. This is the game. Everybody, for the most part, including CEOs of companies that distribute through trucking, loses this game. And they lose the game because y'all start over-ordering and y'all start figuring out how to maximize profit in the middle. And you're like, we can't make new beer in a minute. We have to do this. And so a whole bunch of information pile up that does not have a whole view of the system starts to cause the problems in the system. You can actually win the beer game, which I will show you relatively easily. But this losing the beer game is not the problem. The problem is, at the end, I will ask you what went wrong. And y'all will blame them. And they will blame who knows, economy, COVID. Y'all will blame them, right? And the thing is, you're wrong. Right now, you are blaming something in your professional life, and you're sure it's the problem, and you're wrong. This is so common that we have to actually practice avoiding or noticing this in ourselves, that the blame is very natural, it's pretty much unavoidable, and it usually is wrong. The first reaction that we have is incorrect. Someone playing the beer game ran out of the room, came back, Peter Senge said, "Where'd you go?" He said, "I went to call HR," because they were going to fire the West Coast distribution person. And I realized it's not his fault. It's not his fault, we have a systems problem. That's, I think, what I lived for in my career in a workshop. One person running out of the room to stop firing somebody. So when we're thinking in systems, we're synthesizing knowledge, experience, and sound judgment into recommendations based on valid reasons. So if the three groups met, sent a representative, and understood your constraints, and your constraints, and made a plan to optimize the information flow in the system as a whole, it works. People will have to wait because there's the reality, you can only make so much beer, but you don't hoard anymore. You don't over-order. You don't blame the wrong things. You make the information visible. This is it. If they made the information visible, people could interact with the beer game better than they do by working in silos. So if we want to deliver an impactful outcome that improves the system, then we need systematic reasoning. This is what I was describing when I say sharing the reasons that convinced you. showing why you came to understand that something matters. And processes that construct conceptual integrity, meaning that you can have your point of view, you can have your point of view, and you can have your point of view, but generally speaking, the system will hang together. We understand how information flows over the system and how people can have a positive impact. And then teams are greater than the sum of their parts. This is why teams. We think of it as productivity. The most common, actually I don't want to spoiler because it's coming up later, but the most common thinking about this is in a slide that we're going to look at, but that we think add people increases productivity, but it's actually the relationships between people that enables them to do what nobody can do alone. So optimizing those relationships for better information sharing, better knowledge work will contribute more value. So 3 is a leverage point. So what's a leverage point? A leverage point is a place to intervene in a system. It's a place where you can make a real difference by making a small change that unlocks something in the system and have lasting impact. This is very difficult. You probably will find major leverage points in a system a few times in your entire career. It's very challenging to do. And we can't find leverage points through reductionism. So linear thinking tells us to break everything into parts and examine that parts. That's object-oriented design. It's how we build software. But like I said at the beginning, most systems challenges are in the relationships between the parts, in the patterns and the structures and the mental models. And we'll always have those relationships. And then when something is reoccurring, it's because it's being reinforced by one of our structures. So I'll give you an example that I use in a workshop. This is the fictitious company Mago. Mago was the leading magazine in the entire world. They outsold anything that comes to mind, Time, whatever. They were supreme. And then over time, digital properties started to happen, and they started to also make films and to make smaller publications and other digital magazines, these things. So this is hard to see, but all you really need to know is all the blue boxes are pieces of software. They're proximal, but it's difficult to call them in relationship. The green boxes are also software to facilitate the context, like video production. And the 2 with the big red borders are the core pieces of software. This is where the old print stuff used to go to where digital stuff goes, and then everything moves from there. The minions, the little minions, are actually people moving information, cutting and pasting, because the system can't do that. So from the organization's point of view, this is their system, and they want to know this. They want to know how users are interacting with this piece of software, which they can't, because there's no relationship with the software. So when people interact with their ecosystem, they can't follow them around, right? Also, in between the 2 red boxes is an export script that someone wrote 15 years ago. No one remembers who. And if that one export script fails, the entire system will fail, except for these over here that have built themselves in isolation because the product owner got sick and tired of trying to work with this system, and they went rogue and just started spinning up WordPress sites and cutting and pasting what they wanted so they could skip the engineers completely. There's an app developed by a team outside that makes a product. So this is what happens then. COVID hits, and this company goes out of business. Now, there's only 2 people in the world still using this, so it was, inevitable. But this goes out, and you can see from all the purple people, a lot of people never went anywhere else in this system. So you have a lot of information generated with this one piece of software that then proliferates through human labor and Python scripts across the rest of the system. What they say is, oh my God, replace this software. Quick, right? Right. That would not be a leverage point, right, in this system. This system is a conveyor belt, a Rube Goldberg machine that got built like the Weasley house in Harry Potter, where it just added on software and added on, and then decoupled and went rogue software. They used to be a print publication that became a digital publication, but now they're an information distributor to many contexts, and every context changes what users expect to see. When they look at a page of content, they see different things on their phone. So a leverage point in this system is to focus on the information flow. How can we create once, publish everywhere is overused and poorly executed, and not really the point, but it's in that direction where we're not doing as much duct taping. So you remember that we learned there's a lot of blame in systems, and we discovered that we blame the wrong thing, but we don't only blame the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing. So people who know a system often know intuitively where to find a leverage point, but they're often pushing the change in the wrong direction. This is so common that this is our biggest challenge over the next 5 to 10 years. Is that leverage points are not intuitive. We have built blind spots into the system. When I tell Mago, this is what digital transformation looks like, they are not going to want to hear it. And I call this the 18-month rule. You say it for the first time, and it's going to be 18 months before everybody talks like they thought that all along. Like this is completely true. And they're never going to say, Diana said this 18 months ago. You will not get that. That will not happen. This is the most common example of counterintuitiveness, right? Adding manpower to a late project makes it later. Nevertheless, we persist. So most of the time, we are the cause of our problems. The call is coming from inside the house. And our system of thinking is generating our system's challenges. So this is why we need metacognition. We need to be aware of our own thinking, aware of how we think together, aware of how the system behaves. And so one example that I like to suggest to play with using the iceberg model is that according to a 2022 study, 91.88% of software developers worldwide are men. We can see, to some extent, the number represented here in the room now. We have lots of theories about this. We have goals, hire more women. They don't succeed. Also, by the time a woman has been in tech as long as me, 95% of them have left. So it's not just encouraging women, it's also encouraging them to stay. So what are the core mental models and the structures and the patterns that are reinforcing this? And remember, we're blaming the wrong thing, right? Maybe sometimes the right thing. Twitter does not make me happy about my career in technology at the moment. But people disagree with this. People think that approach is actually a reasonable approach. So the point being, when you think about the iceberg model, using an example like this helps practice with, okay, so like, how do we hire? How are girls educated? Are the females educated different than males? Is it different in different countries? To try and find the leverage point that really will make a difference, because it isn't just deciding to hire more women. That's an event at the top. So if we accept that the most valuable change in a system is a leverage point, not that we have to do that every time, but that it is part of our goal, then we need structures and processes that evolve our ideas and uncover our blind spots. I have an anxious dog. I say, go see. Dog has to come be quiet next to me, and then goes, sees the thing he's afraid of and barks at it. Then he comes back, go see. And I think of this in my career a lot. Like, I don't know, let's go see. Let's go see. And then the patterns will reinforce pattern thinking skills, right? If I had $1 for every time someone said, Diana, that's not concrete. It needs to be concrete. I would not have to be here. I could read my Kobo on a beach somewhere next to my lovely beach house. So Concrete is fine and good. We also, though, need to be able to think about and describe patterns. And then we have designs that lead to emergence, meaning you create relationships that surprise you in a positive way. You start to see innovation you can do now that you couldn't do before because you designed really good relationships. So, but as I said earlier, Donella Meadows says we know from bitter experience that because of counterintuitiveness, when we do discover leverage points, hardly anyone will believe us. This is, I love this. Oh, love. Thanks. Buttons, because I'm wandering. This is a joke. You know, all systems I've worked on have both, but I love this so much because I feel like this sometimes, right? In some of the choices that I've made. And so this is a really important quality if we're thinking about changing the paradigm, right? In other words, not all leverage points are equal. Sometimes we're trying to change the mindset out of which the system's goals, power structures, rules, and cultures emerge. Now, this is daunting and crazy, but it's also liberating, right? Because if no paradigm is right, then you can choose whatever one will help you achieve your purpose. In tech, we fight constantly about the right way to model or how could there be one right way to model? Like, that's the most creative aspect of what it is that we're trying to do, right? So if we can change paradigms, then we can be more flexible, and that we can do hard things together if we have agility and adaptability and diversity, right? Diversity is inherent in natural systems. McDonald's getting rid of diversity also creates all of the trash and the health issue, the medical issues, and all the things that come from that impact that goes together with trying to take diversity out of a system. The impact is visible and considered, and we can evolve our thinking. This is our core mental model. We made this up. So when you feel like a cog in the system, imagine that you are the architect. What would you change? If you could change the system, what would you change? And what you'll find is that the recommendations you make will have more impact than a direct reaction to the problem you're facing. Marketing moment. This is my book. It's an early release. I am finishing the reviewer part, and it's killing me. So you might want to wait a little bit because I hope it's actually better. But it goes into production next week and will be out soon after that. But the early release will still be available. We're also making a community and a library and resources. I want you to tell me about all your favorite stuff. You can look for all that stuff at learningsystemsthinking.com. Made that easy. And also doing a bunch of workshops this year, New Crafts and GDD Academy. So if you want to do some hands-on fun stuff, you can find some times there. And obviously, if you have a systems problem that I can help solve, my team can help solve, I'd love to talk to you about that. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Great. Thanks.